My mom slapped me across the face in front of 30 people because I said no to giving my brother my penthouse. I walked away in silence. But what they didn't expect was the letter that came weeks later. If you've ever been guilted by your own family for having boundaries, this story will change how you see loyalty forever. They called my brother a genius when he couldn't even tie his shoes. They called me responsible. Not brilliant, not gifted, just responsible. I'm Demi, 32 years old, a senior software engineer living in Chicago. People see my life now and think I had it figured out: glass walls, downtown skyline, title, and salary that impress at dinner parties. But they don't know that for most of my life, I was trained to be invisible. I grew up in Milwaukee in a narrow brick house with one shared bathroom and parents who poured every drop of attention into my older brother Evan. He was 3 years ahead of me, born with the effortless charm of someone who never had to earn affection. Evan wasn't cruel. He just never noticed how much space he took up and how little was left for me. He broke a neighbor's window once playing baseball indoors. My father chuckled and called it boys being boys. I forgot to unload the dishwasher and got grounded for a week. At school, I became the girl who stayed quiet, who colored inside every line. My notebooks were flawless. I volunteered for extra credit. I aced every test. My teachers loved me, my parents. They loved Evan's potential, his chaos, his endless creative spirit. When he brought home C's, my mom called the system flawed. When I brought home A's, she said, "That's nice, Demi," before turning back to Evan's latest meltdown. The first time I saw a computer, I was 9. It was old, bulky, and tucked away in the school library. The screen blinked blue and white, and something inside me clicked. I stayed after school to teach myself code. I wrote my first program at 10, a simple game where a dot chased another dot. I showed it to my mom. She said, "That's cute. Evan's working on a song this week. He might play it at Uncle Mike's barbecue." It was like that for years. I kept building, kept learning. I started entering competitions: robotics, math, programming. I once made it to the state finals in a STEM contest. My parents missed it. Evan had an open mic night at a coffee house. He didn't win. He never did. But they said it was brave just to try. In high school, I worked part-time at a local grocery store while Evan quit job after job: personality clashes or too much structure. He never paid rent. Never made curfew. My mom once gave him her credit card because he's trying, Demi. He just needs time. I never asked for anything. Not out of pride. Out of fear that if I did, I'd be told no. Or worse, ignored. When college came, I applied to 12 universities. Got into 8. Earned scholarships to 5. My parents said they couldn't help. College is expensive, my mom explained. We need to be ready for Evan's next steps. Evan, meanwhile, dropped out of 3 schools over 4 years. Each time my parents paid, each time they said it just wasn't the right fit, so I worked. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, weekends at a campus bookstore, nights doing data entry for a delivery company. I slept 4 hours a night, ate cheap instant noodles on the floor of my apartment. Graduated with honors in computer science. My parents came to the ceremony but left early. Evan had a crisis with his landlord. I remember one night in particular. I was 17, sitting at our kitchen table at midnight writing my college essay. My fingers were frozen from lack of heat. My parents turned down the thermostat to save money. Down the hall, Evan was blasting music in his room. My mother had baked him a cake to cheer him up. He had just been fired again. No one asked why I was still awake. No one offered a slice. I wrote that night about learning to thrive in silence. About finding clarity in logic when emotion was chaos. About how sometimes being ignored forces you to build a world no one can take away. I got into my top choice. Full ride. When I told my mom, she blinked and said, "Wow. That's great. Hey, could you help Evan with his FAFSA form?" I nodded. Because that's what I did. I helped. I smiled. I stayed small. Family dinners were the hardest. The adults would go around asking Evan what he was working on. Any new songs? Still exploring that tech startup idea, then look at me and say, "And you, Demi, still doing?" Computer stuff. I became the girl in the family who was too serious, too quiet, not much fun. I was 16 and already being told, lighten up. You don't want to be one of those cold career women. There was one time, just once, when I raised my voice. I was 18, home for the holidays, and Evan had crashed my car without a license. I demanded he pay for repairs. My mother turned to me face flushed and said, "How dare you talk to your brother like that? He's going through a lot right now." She made me apologize. I remember staring at the floor knowing the words were untrue but saying them anyway. That was the last time I let myself break the script. Still, the words my mother once said never left me. I was 16 and she was angry I'd missed Evan's guitar performance to study for a physics test. Girls who try too hard, she snapped, end up alone. I carried that line like a secret. I thought maybe she was right. But I still tried. And now, decades later, I know this. Girls who try too hard don't end up alone. They end up free. They end up standing on 37th floor balconies watching the city below and knowing finally that they made it without anyone handing them a map. This isn't a revenge story. It's a reckoning. It's the beginning of everything. The day I closed on the Penthouse, I didn't cry. I stood alone in the center of the empty space, just me, the echo of my heels against polished concrete, and a view that made my chest tighten. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the room, revealing downtown Chicago like a secret I was finally allowed to keep. The river glinted in late afternoon gold. Buildings shimmered like glass spires. It was silent, sacred. Mine. It wasn't just a property, it was a monument. A testimony. Proof that every unpaid internship, every skipped vacation, every night I stayed coding instead of sleeping, it all led here. For once I didn't have to share. Not my thoughts, not my dreams. Not the thermostat. I had saved for 8 years. Worked through illness. Declined dates. Paid off loans, negotiated raises, built an emergency fund, and researched the market for months before I found the place. When I saw the listing, I knew. Like love at first sight, if love were rational, and came with a mortgage. 2 bedrooms, one of which I turned into a home office facing the skyline. A kitchen that gleamed with intention, marble counters, hidden appliances, lighting that adjusted with my mood. The kind of luxury I never let myself want as a child because I knew it wasn't for people like me. The first person I invited over was Rebecca. She brought sparkling wine and lavender hand soap in a brown paper bag. "You did this," she said, hugging me by the window. "You built this life from scratch." I laughed. From ramen noodles and JavaScript. We toasted with plastic cups. I didn't want to use the glassware yet. It felt too permanent, too ceremonial. As if I needed to earn the right to clink real crystal. A few days later, I sent out the invitation to my family. Housewarming dinner. Sunday at 6. I'll cook. I spent hours planning the menu. My mother's favorite salmon recipe. Evan's favorite IPA. My father's beloved scotch. I set the table with linen napkins and new silverware. Arranged flowers. Ironed the table runner. I thought, if I can make this beautiful enough, maybe they'll finally see me. They arrived 45 minutes late. My mother entered first in her usual perfume cloud, surveying the space like a realtor. "This building must have outrageous fees," she said, her heels clicking across the hardwood. "Seems wasteful for one person." My father walked straight to the window. "Pretty flashy," he murmured. "Hope you didn't overextend yourself. The market could shift." Evan wandered in last in a hoodie and sneakers. He opened my cabinets without asking, poked his head into the office, then flopped on the couch. "Must be nice," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just get lucky." I froze at the stove, spoon in hand, staring into the risotto like it could explain what had just happened. Some people just get lucky. That's what he saw in this apartment. Not the years of grinding. Not the missed birthdays, the canceled dates, the therapy bills. Just luck. I smiled and carried the food to the table. Pretended I didn't hear. Pretended it didn't land like a stone in my stomach. We ate. I asked about my cousins, about my father's golf game. Tried to keep the conversation afloat, but it was like hosting a dinner with ghosts. They talked about Evan's latest interview, how the manager seemed intimidated by his big ideas. No one asked about my promotion. No one noticed the flowers. Or the playlist I'd made with songs from our childhood. After dessert chocolate mousse I had made from scratch, my mother stood by the window and said, "You know, Demi, this is all very impressive. But don't you get lonely? All this space, just for you." She didn't say it cruelly. But she didn't say it with wonder either. Just a kind of polite confusion. As though she couldn't imagine someone choosing a life that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. I laughed softly, too tired to argue. Not really. Later that night after they left, I walked barefoot to the window and stared out into the glittering dark. They hadn't said they were proud, not once. They hadn't complimented the meal, or the apartment. Or me. The silence had weight. I sat on the couch and stared at the empty plates. And for the first time in years I felt something fracture, not in anger but in clarity. This wasn't about them failing to celebrate me. This was about me always expecting that they would. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they didn't want to. But I was done shrinking for applause that would never come. That night I opened my work laptop and finished debugging a project due next week. I listened to Chopin and sipped tea. I emailed Rebecca and told her the dinner was fine. But the truth. Something had cracked open. Something that would never quite close again. It started with a car payment. Evan had just lost another job, something about a manager who couldn't handle his creativity. My mother called me on a Thursday evening. I still remember the way her voice dipped, softened like she was reading from an old script. "He's trying, Demi," she said. "It's just a rough patch." I didn't argue. Not yet. I sent him $320 for his loan, told myself it was a one-time thing. Family, after all. 3 days later, my father called. "Rent's due. His landlord is being unreasonable. You know how heartless these places can be." Another $1, $200. Then came the groceries. "He's eating poorly," my mom texted. "Lost weight. You know he never was good at budgeting." Then the suit. "He has an interview, something professional this time, insurance, I think. But he needs to look the part." "It's just a suit, Demi. You can afford it." The total crept upward slowly but surely. $47 here. $110 there, until I'd sent close to $5. $0 over the course of 6 weeks. Not all at once. Never all at once. That's how it works. One favor at a time. One plea laced with just enough guilt and familiarity to feel like love. At first I didn't even notice. The money was manageable. I made 6 figures. I had a cushion. I was still eating out, still saving. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the expectation. Every request arrived wrapped in the same assumption I would say yes. There was never a moment of "I know this is asking a lot" or "we'll find another way if it's too much." Just soft voices and harder implications. From my mom, "You have more than enough. He's your brother. It's just family." From Evan, "Appreciate you, sis. You're the one who always has it together. I don't know what I'd do without you." It felt flattering almost. Like I was the dependable one. The capable one. But underneath that flattery was something colder. A truth I didn't want to face, yet they were never going to stop asking. Not as long as I kept saying yes. I told Rebecca about it over ramen one night. She stirred her bowl slowly and looked at me not unkindly. "Have you noticed," she said, "how their emergencies always come to you, but their celebrations never do?" I paused. "They lean on you when they're sinking, but never offer you a hand when you rise." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Because I knew she was right. There was no cake when I got my promotion. No flowers when I bought the penthouse. But when Evan defaulted on a loan, I was the first number they called. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself they don't understand. They were raised differently. Money means something else to them. This isn't manipulation, it's just culture. Obligation. But it was starting to wear on me. I could feel it in the way I hesitated before opening a text. In the way my heart raced when I saw Mom flash across my screen. The way I started budgeting not for myself but for their next rough patch. Then came the Sunday dinner. I hadn't planned to go, but guilt is persistent like a song stuck in your head. I brought wine. They didn't open it. I sat at the table while my mother served Evan extra helpings of his favorite casserole and told him how proud she was that he'd applied for a new opportunity. She glanced at me once over her shoulder and said, "Demi, you're still working too much. You'll burn out." When I mentioned my mentorship program at work, how I was helping 2 junior engineers, my father said, "You always do too much. Just because you can doesn't mean you should." It was meant as a caution, maybe, but it stung. After dinner, I helped clear plates while Evan scrolled through his phone. My mom stood next to me at the sink, hands in soapy water, and said, "I just worry sometimes that all this success is making you cold." I blinked. Cold. You're always calculating, always guarding. You used to laugh more. I didn't remember laughing more. I remembered surviving. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred outside my windshield. I kept replaying her words, cold, calculating, too much, like a jury verdict I couldn't appeal. I gripped the wheel tighter, not out of anger, but of something worse, doubt. Was I cold? Was I selfish? Was this penthouse, this quiet freedom, a sign that I'd closed myself off too far? When I got home, I walked barefoot to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed. A message from Evan. "Hey, just found a sweet bike on Facebook Marketplace. Would make commuting easier. Think you could spot me? $600 will pay you back next month." He wouldn't. We both knew that. I stared at the screen, then turned it off and placed it face down. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not because I was afraid of losing money, but because I was afraid of losing the story I'd told myself all my life, that love meant giving. That family meant yes. That helping them made me a good daughter, a good sister, a good person. But now I was starting to wonder who was helping me. Whoever asked what I needed, who looked at me not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. The next morning I sent Evan $100. Not $600. Not zero. A boundary wrapped in grace. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. No thanks. No follow-up. And somehow that was all the answer I needed. I spent too much on the watch. It was stainless steel with a blue sunburst dial and a leather strap I knew Evan would like because I'd overheard him admire something similar once years ago before another job loss, another reset. It cost more than I was comfortable spending, especially after the $5,000 I'd lent him. But I wanted desperately to show up as the good sister. The dependable one. The one who hadn't changed even after moving 37 floors above everything. I wrapped it in silver paper and tied the ribbon twice. That morning my phone buzzed with messages. From my mom, "Don't forget his cake. He loves the chocolate mousse from Belle's." From my father, "Please be on time. Your mother's worked hard." From my aunt, "Wear something nice. The whole family will be there." I chose a conservative blue dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing to spark accusations of showing off. No heels. No jewelry. Just understated dignity. I arrived at 6:00 p.m. sharp. Knocked once before stepping in. The house was full. Too full. Every cousin, every uncle, every neighbor my parents had spoken to in the last decade was there. Balloons. A banner. Roast beef and rolls. Evan held court in the backyard laughing with a beer in hand. He saw me arrive but didn't come over. My mother met me at the door, her eyes flicking briefly to my shoes. "Finally," she said. "Put your gift on the table." She walked away before I could answer. I moved through the house like a guest at someone else's wedding, smiling politely, receiving obligatory nods. One aunt leaned in and whispered, "How's that fancy place treating you?" The way she said fancy made it feel like an accusation. Another guest I didn't recognize said, "Must be nice to live alone." No one to answer to. Dinner passed in a blur of polite disinterest. My parents sat beside Evan. I was placed next to my father's coworker and cousin Stephanie, who gave me a sympathetic look now and then. They passed Evan's second helpings, praised his big ideas, told stories about his charm. No one asked about my work. No one mentioned the penthouse. Not even to criticize. When Evan opened my gift, he barely looked at it. Mumbled "Thanks sis" and tossed it aside. My mother added, very thoughtful of her, Marcus. You always appreciate quality, don't you? Then she turned back to the next box. I waited for the right moment to slip out. It came after the cake, right as people were starting to stand and gather coats. That's when my father stood, clinked his glass with a spoon. If I could have everyone's attention, he began, voice projecting over the chatter. We have something important to discuss, as a family. My body tensed. He spoke slowly, deliberately. As you all know, Evans had some setbacks recently. But we believe in second chances. We believe in family. My mother joined him, eyes scanning the room until they found me. Family means helping each other, especially when some of us have been more fortunate than others. Then came the words, let Evan move into your penthouse just for a while. The room fell silent. Aunt Judith nodded. Makes sense. It's such a big place for just one person. My father added, he just needs some stability. And you have space. A spare room even. Evan leaned back in his chair, half smiling like it was already done. I looked around. Every eye was on me. Waiting. I took a breath. Saturday up straighter. My home, I said carefully, is not available. I worked very hard for it. It's not an extra property, it's my sanctuary. You could still live there, my mother replied instantly. He just needs a place to regroup. 6 months max. We all know it wouldn't be 6 months, I said softly. A few gasps, a few murmurs. You're being dramatic, Evan cut in. I wouldn't even be in your way. You're being selfish, my mother snapped. And then in front of 30 people, relatives, neighbors, strangers, she walked across the room, raised her hand, and slapped me. Hard. It echoed. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't run. I looked at her. At the hand still half raised. At her chest rising with anger. At the room that had gone dead quiet, no one stepped in. No one said a word. They looked away. Or down. Or at each other. But not at me. I turned. Picked up my purse. Walked slowly to the door. Opened it. Closed it behind me. No dramatic exit, no final line. Just the soft click of a door I knew I'd never walk through again. In the car, I didn't drive. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and my heartbeat echoing in my ears. And then the tears came. Slow at first, then heavier. Not just for the slap, but for every moment before it that I hadn't left. For every year I kept trying to earn love like a bonus check. When I finally reached home, I walked into my penthouse and locked the door behind me. Slid to the floor back against the wood and sobbed. This wasn't just a slap. This was the truth delivered the only way they knew how. And I was finally done listening. The morning after the birthday party, I woke up to 23 unread messages. The first was from my father. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. You owe her an apology. The second from Aunt Judith, family disagreements should stay private. Walking out like that was immature. The third from Uncle Don. You've broken your mother's heart. You always were the cold one. And then came the one that made my stomach drop, from Evan. Way to ruin my birthday. Some people choose money over blood. Sad. Attached was a screenshot, his latest post on Facebook. When your own sister chooses a luxury view over loyalty. Family isn't disposable. Some people forget who raised them the minute they can afford to. Number, family first. Number, disappointed but not surprised. The comment section read like a courtroom of self-righteous relatives. What happened to values? Her success clearly went to her head. Poor Evan. He's always been the heart of that family. She was always distant. I'm not surprised. I felt a chill in my bones. Not anger yet, just disbelief. It was one thing to be guilted in private. But this was a public crucifixion. I turned off my phone. It buzzed again less than an hour later. My building's concierge Carl called. Miss Williams, he said gently, there are 2 individuals in the lobby. They say they're your parents, very insistent. My blood ran cold. Do not let them up, I said. Please ask them to leave. If they refuse, call security. Yes, ma'am, Carl said. Already noted. 20 minutes later, I watched through the peephole as Carl escorted them back to the elevator. My father's face was red with rage. My mother dabbed her eyes dramatically with a tissue. The audacity to come here, unannounced, after what they did. That night I sat in the dark, arms wrapped around my knees, watching headlights thread through the city streets. I hadn't felt this small in years. I thought about the post, the comments, the silence from people I'd once called cousins. They weren't defending me. They weren't asking what happened. They'd already picked a side and it wasn't mine. The following day I went to work early. Needed the routine, the normalcy. But just before lunch I got a text from Emma. "Hey, your brother is downstairs. He's asking for you." I stared at the screen. Seconds later she sent another. Security asked if they should let him up. "He says it's urgent." I closed my laptop. Walked to the security desk. My voice was calm. "Do not let him in. Escort him out if needed. And please add him to the no-access list." They nodded. But I could feel it. That tension rising in my chest. That shame, irrational but still alive, of having family drama spill into my professional life. I wanted to hide, to vanish. That evening, Evan posted again. "Money doesn't buy decency. Or empathy. Or respect." Some of us still believe in showing up for each other, even if we don't have penthouse views. More comments, more pity, more subtle stabs. I blocked him. Blocked my mother, my father. Every single relative who'd liked or commented on those posts. I shut every window they used to crawl into my peace. And still, I couldn't breathe. It felt like drowning, except no one saw the water. That night, I opened a new document. Typed out a list, amounts I'd given Evan in the past year. Every unsolicited visit, message, call. The slap. The post. The invasion of my home. I needed to see it. Needed proof that I wasn't imagining this. That it wasn't just family stuff. That it was in fact abuse disguised as concern. The next morning I called Dr. Mitchell. She'd been my therapist 3 years ago, back when I thought burnout was my biggest problem. I hadn't seen her since. Her voice was warm but steady. "What brings you back?" I told her everything. The birthday trap. The slap. The smear campaign. She listened. Didn't interrupt once. Then she said with more certainty than I'd expected. "This is emotional abuse, Demi. It's not subtle. It's not occasional. It's patterned. It's intentional. And it's escalating." I said nothing for a long moment. "Then I keep thinking I'm overreacting." She shook her head. "That's what they want you to think. It's what they've trained you to think. When people violate your boundaries, then make you feel guilty for having them, that's not love. That's control." Something broke open. Tears again, but not from grief this time. From relief. She saw it. She named it. It wasn't just me. Before the session ended, I asked, "What do I do now?" Her voice was clear. "You start protecting yourself. Relentlessly." The waiting room was too quiet. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, the kind meant to soothe without drawing attention. A bowl of peppermint candies sat untouched beside a rack of outdated psychology magazines. I didn't touch either. I sat on the edge of the couch, knees together, palms sweating. I hadn't been in therapy in over 3 years, back when I'd convinced myself my only issue was work-life balance. Back then, I didn't have the language for what I was actually living. When Dr. Howard opened the door, she smiled gently. Nothing performative, just enough to let me exhale. "Demi," she said. "Come in. I'm glad you reached out." I walked into her office like it was the last safe place on earth. Soft chairs. A lamp with warm light. No mirrors. Just her notebook in hand, giving me her full attention. I didn't cry right away. I started with facts. I walked out of my brother's birthday party. My mother slapped me in front of 30 people. No one did anything. Then they came to my building. My brother posted about me online. I blocked them all. I haven't spoken to anyone in 2 weeks. Dr. Howard nodded slowly. "And how are you feeling now?" I hesitated, shaky, and relieved. And guilty. Like I betrayed something sacred. Like I dropped the weight I was supposed to carry, and now I don't know who I am without it. That's when the tears came. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked gently, Demi, may I ask? Growing up, how were conflicts handled in your family? I swallowed. They weren't. Everything revolved around my brother. If he was upset, everything paused. If I was upset, I was being dramatic. You mentioned your brother a lot. Let me ask you something and answer from your gut. Who was the golden child in your family? I didn't hesitate. Evan. And who is the scapegoat? My voice faltered. Me. She nodded. That dynamic is incredibly common in narcissistic family systems. One child is idealized no matter how little they do. The other is pathologized no matter how much they accomplish. I blinked. I'd read about it once late at night after one too many guilt-ridden phone calls from my mother. But seeing it reflected back by a professional was like hearing someone say your secret out loud and still offering you a seat at the table. So, it's real, I asked. It's very real, she said. And what you've described isn't just dysfunction, it's emotional abuse. Strategic. Long-term. Reinforced by silence and performance. I sat back in my chair. I've spent so many years trying to prove I'm not cold, that I'm still good. Because they taught you, she said softly, that love has to be earned. And that setting boundaries is selfish. The silence in the room pulsed like a heartbeat. Then she added, but what you did leaving that party saying no, walking away wasn't selfish. It was survival. I laughed short and bitter. Then why does it feel like I'm the villain in their story? Because in families like yours, she said, truth tellers are always cast as villains. They threaten the illusion. I felt that in my bones. For years I'd made myself smaller, kinder, more generous. Not because they deserved it, but because I was terrified of being the daughter who stopped trying. The sister who gave up. The woman who became too much. And still, no matter what I gave, they took it all and then demanded more. Doctor. Howard leaned forward slightly. There's a term for what you're experiencing, abuse disguised as loyalty. You've been told your entire life that giving until you break is what makes you loving. But love doesn't ask you to disappear. I let that sentence hang in the air. Like a diagnosis I'd needed my whole life. Love doesn't ask you to disappear. When the session ended, she gave me a handout. It was titled, The Scapegoat Child Healing the Unseen Wound. I skimmed the first few lines before folding it into my purse. For the first time in weeks, I walked home without looking over my shoulder. That night, as I sat by the window sipping tea, I opened an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. Most of the pictures were of Evan birthday parties, school plays, football uniforms. I found only a few of myself, usually standing in the corner holding a book or wearing the same dress as the year before. It didn't hurt like it used to. Now it confirmed what I knew. I thought of that summer when I was 12 and asked why Evan didn't have chores like I did. My mother scolded me for questioning fairness. She said girls who keep score always end up alone. That was her favorite line. A warning and a curse in one breath. During our next session, Dr. Howard asked me to describe a moment where I first felt emotionally abandoned. I told her that story. She leaned forward and said something that stayed with me. That wasn't discipline. That was silencing. You weren't dramatic, you were observant. No one had ever told me that before. She introduced me to a framework called gaslighting through caretaking. When I raised my eyebrows, she explained, it's when a family uses affection as a leash. You're told you're loved as long as you remain useful. You're allowed to succeed as long as you stay quiet about the dysfunction. The moment you ask for fairness or worse, justice, you're branded ungrateful. I nodded slowly. It felt like someone was describing my life back to me word for word. We made a list on her whiteboard, love with conditions, loyalty as control, boundaries labeled selfish, silence mistaken for peace. You've internalized a family system where your needs were threats, she said. Of course, standing up for yourself feels like betrayal. You were never shown that love can coexist with autonomy. That evening I wrote a letter I'd never sent. It began, Dear 12-year-old me, I'm sorry no one stood up for you when you asked questions. I'm sorry they called you difficult when you were just trying to understand. I'm sorry you thought you had to earn safety with silence. I see you now. I believe you. And I promise you this ends with me. I sealed the note inside a journal and placed it in my nightstand. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't apologizing for needing space. I was choosing myself not to abandon them, but to finally stop abandoning me. Dr. Howard told me healing wasn't linear. There will be days you want to go back. That's okay. Just remember, you're not rejecting love. You're rejecting manipulation masquerading as love. That distinction changed everything. I started reading books on boundaries, on adult children of narcissists, on trauma responses. I learned how my body had remembered what my mind tried to forget: the tension in my shoulders, the urge to over-explain, the inability to say no without guilt. It wasn't character flaws, it was survival training. And I was finally unlearning it. Each night I lit that same candle and reminded myself I don't have to earn rest. I don't have to prove my worth. I'm allowed to take up space. And just like that, the fog began to lift. Piece by piece, I was becoming whole. Demi chose the restaurant carefully. It was upscale but neutral, no sentimental ties, no risk of nostalgia clouding her clarity. The private dining room offered just enough distance from other patrons to allow honesty, but not enough privacy to enable another emotional ambush. She had learned. She arrived 20 minutes early, folder in hand. Inside was a document she had drafted and revised with care, a boundary agreement. It wasn't legalese, it wasn't a punishment, it was a map of how and if any relationship with her family could continue. One page listed a timeline: her jobs, promotions, rent history, and self-paid education. On the opposite column, Evan's 3 failed college attempts, multiple jobs lost, and the tens of thousands of dollars in family bailouts. No embellishments. Just facts. She took a breath and laid the documents flat on the table. At exactly 6:00 p.m., her parents walked in. Her mother wore the same expression she'd worn at Evan's birthday party: wounded, indignant, slightly theatrical. Her father looked downcast, not angry but dimmed. Evan was 10 minutes late. Of course. Demi stood and offered each of them a seat. "Thank you for coming," she said evenly. "I want to be clear, this is not a confrontation. It's a conversation about boundaries. About what I need moving forward." Her mother scoffed. "A list of demands?" "Then no," Demi replied calmly. "A list of conditions. For any relationship to be mutual and healthy." She handed out copies of the timeline. Her mother didn't look at it. Her father skimmed the headers. Evan laughed and pushed it aside. "Seriously," he said. "You made a resume for your ego." "No," Demi replied. "I made a mirror." Then she laid down the second sheet, the boundary agreement. It included 5 points. No more financial requests. No discussion of sharing her home. No unannounced visits to her residence or workplace. Communication must remain respectful, no insults, no guilt-tripping. Any violation would result in 6 months of no contact. Her mother's voice trembled. "So it's your way or nothing." Demi folded her hands. "It's healthy boundaries or no contact. It's not a threat, it's self-respect." Her father spoke then. "Why now? Why this? We're family." "Exactly," she replied. "And I'm not willing to let family continue hurting me under the guise of love." Evan rolled his eyes. "You've always thought you were better than us." Demi turned to him, not with anger but with a calm she'd earned drop by drop. "I've always hoped we could be better together. But I won't keep sacrificing my well-being for hope." He slammed his glass down. "You're selfish." She didn't flinch. "This is not a debate, it's a choice." That line wasn't just for them, it was for her. Because every time they challenged her reality, they were offering her a fork in the road: gaslight yourself or choose the truth you already knew. And this time, Demi chose herself. As she waited in the private dining room before their arrival, Demi had stared out the tall windows overlooking the evening traffic of downtown Chicago. The skyline twinkled in defiance of everything broken beneath it. She thought about the first time she ever compromised to keep the peace when she was 17 and gave up her acceptance to a summer coding program because Evan had just been suspended again and the family couldn't handle 2 crises at once. She remembered how her mother had said, "You'll have other chances. Your brother needs this family more than you do." And she had nodded. and smiled, and folded herself smaller to keep the world from collapsing. It had taken 15 years to unfold again. Tonight wasn't just a conversation, it was the unburying of every "it's fine" she'd ever choked down. The reclaiming of every moment she'd sacrificed for someone else's comfort. She had considered canceling more than once. But then she remembered Dr. Howard's words, "Your silence kept you safe. But it also kept you invisible." This meeting isn't about being heard by them, it's about hearing yourself speak your truth out loud. So when her mother started with the familiar sigh and her father looked at her as if waiting for her to break first, Demi didn't shrink. She held steady. "I'm not here to win," she said. "I'm here to be clear." The silence that followed was heavy, but not unbearable. For once, Demi wasn't filling it. She wasn't rescuing anyone from discomfort. When no one reached for the pen to sign, Demi nodded. "I understand. That's your choice." She stood gathering the papers. Her father whispered, "You've changed." Demi paused at the door. I finally stopped pretending. And with that she left, not in anger, not in sorrow, but in sovereignty. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She walked 3 blocks before hailing a cab, her phone buzzing in her coat pocket, likely messages already rewriting the evening. Maybe Evan would post again. Maybe her mother would call her dramatic. Maybe her father would say she overreacted. But none of it mattered now. She had drawn her boundary with grace and facts. She had not begged to be understood. She had not asked for permission to be whole. And that was power. Back home in her penthouse, Demi made tea and curled into the corner of her couch. The skyline glowed outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet chorus of resilience. She opened her journal and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. "Respect is the only currency I'll trade in now." Then she closed the journal, turned off her phone, and let herself sleep deeply, fully, for the first time in what felt like years. The silence came not with a bang but with a flicker. There were no grand announcements. No formal disowning, just a quiet, calculated absence. No texts from her mother, no guilt-laced voicemails from her father. Evan stopped posting jabs online, at least publicly. It was as if Demi had been cut from the family tree with surgical precision, and no one was willing to look at the stump. At first it was disorienting. For so long, even the dysfunction had provided rhythm. The toxic cycle of push and pull had shaped her emotional weather, and now it was still. Too still. For the first time in her life, no one was demanding she fix something that wasn't hers to fix. But silence, like soil, can grow unexpected things. Demi threw herself into a book club that met every other Thursday in a cozy, light-filled shop on the edge of Logan Square. The first meeting, she barely spoke. By the fourth, she was recommending authors and laughing without scanning the room for judgment. She wasn't performing anymore, she was arriving. She joined a hiking group that met Sundays at dawn, their boots crunching over fallen leaves while the city still slept. The air was sharp and clear, like the clarity that had begun to settle in her bones. Strangers became companions. No one asked who she was in relation to someone else. She was just Demi. That was enough. One Saturday morning, she passed by a sign for a watercolor class at the community center. She hadn't held a paintbrush since grade school, but something in her longed to create without expectation. She signed up, and the first time her brush touched paper, she cried quietly, unexpectedly, not because the painting was beautiful, but because no one was grading it. For once, beauty didn't have to be earned. The seasons changed. Fall bled into winter. The holidays came and went without obligation. Demi spent Thanksgiving making pumpkin ravioli from scratch while jazz played in the background. On Christmas, she wrapped books for the friends who had become family, Rebecca, Emma, and others whose love didn't come with fine print. One evening in January, she stood barefoot in her kitchen making soup from a recipe her grandmother, not her mother, had taught her as a child. She turned on a playlist of soft indie ballads and danced, stirring lentils with one hand, sipping wine with the other. There was no audience. No criticism, no expectation. Just a woman in her home, in her joy. She lit candles. She poured the soup into a ceramic bowl she had glazed herself in an art class. She sat on the floor by the window and ate slowly, watching the lights of the city flicker like quiet applause. The silence that once frightened her had become a sanctuary. She no longer checked her phone in dread. She no longer felt the phantom pressure to explain her choices. In the absence of noise, she had found a rhythm of her own. One night she journaled a single line before bed. Peace isn't the absence of family, it's the presence of self. And as she drifted to sleep under a soft blanket with the windows open just enough to hear the wind hum through the city, she chose. Demi knew something sacred. She was no longer surviving her life. She was living it. There were moments, of course, when the ache returned unexpectedly like static from an old radio. A commercial for Mother's Day would flash on her screen, and her breath would catch. In the grocery store, she'd overhear a young woman chatting with her mom on speakerphone, and for a second she'd feel 14 again, holding out an award certificate only to be told, "Don't brag, Demi. Be humble." But now she had tools. When the ghosts stirred, she didn't silence them. She greeted them, then set them down gently. Dr. Howard had once said healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral staircase. Sometimes you circle the same place but from a higher floor. So Demi built higher floors. She started volunteering once a month at a tech mentorship program for high school girls. The first time she told her story without shame, without flinching, a freshman named Naomi looked at her with wide eyes and whispered, "You sound like me." It hit Demi like a tide. This wasn't just healing, this was legacy. One Thursday evening, her book club read a memoir about a woman who left a cult. During the discussion, someone said, "What's hardest isn't leaving the belief system, it's grieving the version of you who needed it to feel loved." Demi didn't speak, but her eyes burned. That was exactly it. Her old self had believed love required shrinking, sacrifice, silence. But this version of her, this quiet, vibrant, expanding self, knew something better. On weekends, she began exploring neighborhoods she had never taken time to see. She'd stop at hole-in-the-wall coffee shops, leave poems on napkins, and smile at strangers. She bought fresh flowers even when no one would see them. She let herself be soft without needing to be small. In February, a snowstorm blanketed the city. Most people complained, but Demi bundled up and walked to the lakefront path. The world was muffled, cocooned in white. She sat on a bench with a thermos of tea and watched geese glide across frozen water. For once her thoughts were not about what had been taken from her but what she had reclaimed. Later that night, she lit a fire in the living room, curled beneath a quilt, and reread a letter she had written to herself on New Year's Eve. "You don't have to earn your place in the world. You already belong." Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow but of softness. Of settling into herself. Of finally coming home. She still didn't hear from her family. Not even on her birthday. And strangely, that absence no longer stung. It just was. Like a scar that no longer aches when it rains. Instead, on her birthday, her friends gathered in her apartment. Rebecca brought a playlist, Emma brought candles, and someone baked a cake topped with edible flowers. They danced barefoot in the living room to songs Demi had once played alone in her kitchen. The night ended with laughter, messy dishes, and quiet toasts to freedom. When everyone had left, Demi stood alone again, lights dimmed, bare feet warm against the hardwood. She looked out over the city, heart steady, voice clear. "I didn't lose a family," she whispered. "I found myself." The email came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a newsletter from her favorite bookstore and a coupon for cleaning services she never used. The subject line was simple, from Dad. Her hand hovered over the mouse, heart skipping in that old trained rhythm, fight or freeze. She clicked. "Demi, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our meeting. While I don't agree with everything you said, I can see that I haven't always treated you fairly. Your mother isn't ready to acknowledge this. Evan certainly isn't. But I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I respect the strength it took to stand up for yourself. If you're willing, I'd like to meet for coffee. Just the two of us." Dad. Demi read it 3 times. It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't nothing. She thought of the man who had once praised Evan for quitting a job because real visionaries don't clock in. Who told her when she graduated summa cum laude, "That's nice, but don't let it go to your head." She thought of how he had stood silent when her mother slapped her. But she also remembered being 8 in the garage learning to change a bike tire with him. She remembered that he had taught her to drive, clutching the armrest as she lurched down side streets yelling, "Too fast." But never taking the wheel. So, she wrote back. "Okay. 1 hour. Neutral ground. Please don't bring Mom." They met that Saturday at a quiet coffee shop near a public garden, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. Demi arrived 10 minutes early as always. Her father walked in precisely on time wearing the same worn brown coat he'd had since she was in high school. He looked older, tired. Less like an authority figure, more like a man carrying too many things he didn't know how to put down. "Hi," he said, hesitating before sitting. "Thanks for coming." Demi nodded. "Thanks for asking." There was a pause. Then small talk. Coffee orders. Weather. The awkward circling of people not sure where to begin. "I read the contract again," he said finally. "The boundaries. It's a lot." "It's necessary," Demi replied, voice calm. "And it's not negotiable." "I know," he said, surprising her. "I didn't come to change your mind. I came to understand it." And slowly, over the next 40 minutes, something unexpected happened. Her father listened. He didn't defend or deflect. He asked questions not to poke holes but to learn. He admitted he had failed to protect her at the birthday party. That he had been passive too long, afraid of her mother's anger, unsure how to stop enabling Evan. "I used to think keeping the peace was love," he said. "But I see now that silence can be a kind of violence too." Demi blinked. Her throat tightened. For the first time in her adult life, she saw him not as a patriarch or a gatekeeper, but as a flawed, frightened man trying in his own late way to be better. "I don't know if I can fix what's broken," he said. "But I'd like to start by showing up differently. If you'll let me." She didn't reach across the table. She didn't offer absolution. But she said, "We can try. Slowly. With boundaries intact." He nodded. And for the rest of the coffee they talked not as father and daughter bound by hierarchy, but as two people rebuilding something fragile and real. Outside, the air was brisk. Her father walked her to her car, then stood there awkwardly, hands in pockets. "Thanks again," he said. She nodded. "Take care, Dad." He turned to leave, then paused. "You're really doing okay, aren't you?" Demi smiled. "Better than okay." That night she journaled one line. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without letting it burn." The following week, Demi found herself reflecting on the conversation more often than she expected. There was no fairy tale transformation. Her father didn't suddenly become emotionally fluent or perfectly present. But there were small things. He sent her a link to an article about women in tech with a one-line message, "Reminded me of you." He left her a voicemail just to say he hoped she was doing okay in the snowstorm. When she replied with a thank you, he didn't immediately pivot the conversation back to Evan as he once might have. The silence from her mother and Evan continued, sharp and deliberate. Yet somehow the absence felt less like abandonment now and more like space. Space she could breathe in. Space where new things could grow. On a chilly Thursday morning, Demi stopped by a neighborhood thrift store she liked for its quiet corners and handwritten book labels. As she thumbed through the memoir section, her phone buzzed. A message from her dad. "Just saw your name mentioned in a local tech journal. You're doing great work. Proud of you." She stood frozen for a moment, phone in hand. It wasn't just the words, it was the fact that he'd noticed. On his own. Without prompting. She texted back simply, "Thanks, Dad." That weekend, they met again for coffee. No big agenda, just warm mugs between them and talk of small human things. He asked about her hiking group. She asked about a new book he'd started reading. There were still silences, but now they felt like pauses, not avoidance. At one point he said, "You know, I keep thinking about that timeline you showed us. I didn't want to look at it then. But I did later, and it's sobering. I had no idea how much of your success you had to fight for." "You didn't ask," Demi said, not bitterly but truthfully. He nodded. "That was my failure, one of many." The honesty stung, but also soothed. On her walk home afterward, Demi realized something unexpected. She didn't need her father to be perfect. She just needed him to be honest. That night she pulled out an old photo album. One with curled edges and cheap plastic sleeves. She found a picture of herself at age 10 holding a science fair ribbon standing beside her dad. His hand was on her shoulder. Neither of them was smiling quite right, but there was something tentative there. A reach. She slipped the photo into a new frame and placed it on a shelf, not to glorify the past but to acknowledge it. To mark it as a beginning, however, flawed. Demi didn't tell her friends about the second coffee meeting right away. It felt too delicate, too easily misunderstood. But in her next therapy session with Dr. Howard, she recounted it carefully. "You're building a boundary that breathes," Dr. Howard said. "That's advanced work." Demi smiled. "It doesn't feel like forgiveness. It feels like mutual curiosity." "That's sometimes better than forgiveness," her therapist replied. "It means you're both willing to grow." As spring began to touch the city with pale blossoms and softer winds, Demi let the new chapter unfold slowly. There were no grand reconciliations. No apologies written in gold. But there was room. And in that room, Demi planted something new. She didn't call it hope, she didn't label it healing, she just let it grow. And that was enough. The invitation list was short, just 12 names. No extended family, no obligatory plus ones. Just people who had shown up consistently, not for what Demi could give, but for who she was. Rebecca, of course, who had walked beside her through every unraveling and every rebuild. Emma, her sharp-eyed coworker turned confidant. A few members from her hiking group. A barista who had once held her hand through a panic attack outside the cafe. Her therapist had encouraged the gathering. Celebrate the boundaries you've built with those who honored them. Demi decided on a dinner party. Intimate. Honest. Unapologetically hers. She spent the morning prepping, chopping, seasoning, humming along to a playlist filled with voices of women who had once felt voiceless. She lit candles that smelled like cedar and orange peel. She set the table with mismatched but meaningful plates, each one holding a story. When the doorbell rang at 6:03 p.m., Demi didn't flinch. No dread, no defensiveness. Just a breath and then joy. Guests trickled in with wine and laughter. The penthouse, once shadowed by expectations and manipulation, now radiated warmth. Someone put Aretha on the speaker. Someone else toasted to growth that didn't ask for permission. Halfway through the evening, Demi slipped away to the balcony. The city stretched before her, glittering and unapologetic. From this height, the streets seemed smaller. The noise of the past quieter. Rebecca joined her wine glass in hand. "You okay?" Demi nodded. "Better than okay." She looked out over the lights of Chicago, the lake shimmering like a secret. "You know," she said, "I didn't just buy this view. I earned this peace." Rebecca smiled. "Damn right you did." They stood in silence, not the awkward kind but the sacred kind. Inside, laughter rose from the dining room. Demi felt it vibrate through the floor, through her feet, through the place she now claimed fully as her own. She remembered the moment she'd first stepped into the apartment months ago. It had been quiet then too, but a different kind of quiet. The anxious kind. The "will they try to take this from me" kind. But now it was filled with the sounds of chosen family, of boundaries honored, of respect earned, not demanded. Later, as the last guest hugged her goodbye and the final dish was placed in the sink, Demi made herself a cup of tea. She walked barefoot to the balcony one last time, mug warm between her palms. Below, the city pulsed with midnight life. Above, stars poked through the clouds, soft, persistent. She didn't think of Evan. Or her mother. Or the threats, the slap, the contract. She thought of herself. Of the 10-year-old girl with the science ribbon. Of the college student who worked 3 jobs. Of the woman who sat across from her father and said no with a steady voice. And she thought of what came next. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just life. Her life. A life designed with intention. Lived without apology. Guarded without guilt. She raised her mug slightly as if toasting the skyline. "True family," she whispered, "is not who you were born to, it's who shows up when you say no and still loves you anyway." And with that, she turned and walked inside. Ready for everything that came after. She didn't clean up right away. Instead, Demi let the silence linger like a final guest. Plates remained where they were, evidence of joy of shared stories and clinking glasses. She moved slowly through the apartment, fingers brushing the back of a chair, the edge of a photo frame, the lip of the wine glass she hadn't finished. She paused by the wall near the entryway where she had once considered hanging a family portrait. She had left it blank. Tonight, though, she imagined a new kind of photo, Rebecca laughing mid-sentence, Emma with a fork halfway to her mouth gesturing wildly, herself not posing but simply being. It struck her how long she had chased love in the form of approval, grades, promotions, expensive gifts wrapped in silent pleas. Tonight no one had asked her to prove her worth. They simply came and stayed and listened. On the kitchen island sat a card handwritten by Amina, a friend from her book club. Inside it read, "To the woman who taught us that strength doesn't shout. Thank you for showing us how peace can look." Demi smiled, the kind that began in her chest before reaching her lips. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain slightly aside. The skyline hadn't changed, but her view of it had. A flash of memory came, her mother scoffing at the penthouse, Evan muttering about how some people get lucky. Back then, those words had carved wounds. Tonight, they were just echoes fading into the walls. She had repainted the shelves, she had arranged the space she had claimed. She thought of the word penthouse, how it used to mean something lofty and exclusive, almost selfish. Now it meant something else entirely. It meant earned. It meant safe. It meant mine. Her phone buzzed. A message from Stephanie. "Saw your light still on. I'm downstairs. Want to walk?" Demi smiled. A spontaneous walk at midnight months ago, she would have said no out of obligation or exhaustion. But now she typed, "Meet me by the lake in 10. She slipped into a hoodie, left the dishes soaking, and grabbed her keys. On the elevator ride down, she caught her reflection in the mirror, hair tied back, no makeup, face soft but certain. It was the face of someone who had stopped performing and started living. They walked slowly, shoes crunching gravel. Stephanie spoke about a new community theater project. Demi shared a recent breakthrough at work. When the conversation paused, it wasn't out of awkwardness, it was out of peace. At the edge of the lake, they stopped. "I still miss them sometimes," Demi admitted quietly. "Even now. Even after everything." Stephanie nodded. "Missing people doesn't mean you want them back. It just means you remember how much it hurt." They stood for a while watching the dark water move. Then Stephanie asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to your mom again?" "I don't know," Demi said. "But I know I won't chase it." They turned back toward the building. Later that night, Demi stood once more on her balcony. The city shimmered beneath her, oblivious and eternal. But she was not small, not anymore. She whispered into the quiet, "I am not who they said I was. I am who I chose to become." And this time the silence felt like applause.